In the summer of 1942, the German Wehrmacht was, by all accounts, the master of Europe. The previous winter's setback at Moscow was seen merely as a delay, a hiccup in an otherwise perfect machine. As the ground thawed, Hitler turned his gaze away from the Soviet capital and looked south. The plan was codenamed Operation Blue. The objective was economic, to seize the oil fields of the Caucasus and starve the Soviet war machine of fuel. But standing on the flank of this advance was a city on the Volga River, a major industrial hub. Yes, but more importantly, it bore the name of the Soviet leader, Stalingrad. What began as a strategic necessity soon mutated into a psychological obsession for both dictators. Hitler wanted the city taken because it was Stalin's city. Stalin ordered it held for the exact same reason. And so, two massive armies were drawn into a meat grinder that would decide the fate of the entire war. The battle for the city proper began in late August. And it began with an act of overwhelming violence that, ironically, would seal the Germans' fate. General Wolfram von Richthofen's Luftwaffe unleashed a firestorm upon Stalingrad. Thousands of tons of high explosives reduced the city to rubble.
Cover me! I'm moving!
The Germans believed they were paving the way for a swift occupation. But in reality, they had just constructed the world's most formidable fortress for their enemy. You see, the German blitzkrieg relies on speed, maneuver, and open terrain. It requires roads for tanks and clear lines of sight for artillery. But by destroying the buildings, the Germans clogged the streets with debris. They created a chaotic landscape of twisted steel and broken concrete where tanks could not move, and where air power was negated. As the German Sixth Army, under General Friedrich Paulus, pushed into the suburbs, they didn't find a broken enemy. By September and October, the battle had devolved into something the German soldiers bitterly called Rattenkrieg, the War of the Rats. The front lines were no longer drawn on a map. They were drawn through the middle of living rooms. It was not uncommon for the Germans to control the third floor of a building, while the Soviets held the basement and the ground floor, firing at each other through holes in the ceiling. General Chuikov implemented a tactic he called hugging the enemy. He ordered his troops to keep their positions no more than 50 meters away from the Germans.
Keep your heads down. Here they come.
This was a stroke of brutal genius. It meant that the German artillery and dive bombers could not support their infantry without risking hitting their own men. The technological superiority of the Wehrmacht evaporated. A Panzer tank is useless when a soldier with a Molotov cocktail drops onto its engine deck from a second-story window. The fighting was savage. The railway station changed hands 14 times in 6 hours. The grain elevator, a massive concrete structure, was held by just 40 Soviet soldiers against an entire German division for days. Casualties were astronomical. The life expectancy of a new Soviet soldier arriving across the Volga was measured in hours, not days. But they held on. They held on just enough to keep Paulus focused on the city, ignoring the gathering storm on his flanks. While the world watched the street fighting in horror, the Soviet High Command, Zhukov and Vasilevsky, were quietly preparing a masterstroke Operation Uranus. They noticed what Hitler had ignored. To concentrate his best German troops in the city, meat grinder, Paulus had left his flanks to be guarded by Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian allies. These units were ill-equipped, overstretched, and lacked heavy anti-tank weapons. On November 19th, as the harsh Russian winter truly set in, the Soviets struck. They didn't attack the city directly, they attacked the weak flanks north and south of it. The Romanian lines collapsed almost instantly under the weight of Soviet T-34s. Within 4 days, the two Soviet pincers met at Kalach, miles behind the German lines.
Go!
The trap had snapped shut. Suddenly, the besiegers became the besieged. 300,000 soldiers of the Sixth Army were trapped in what they called Der Kessel, the cauldron. Hitler, delusional and misled by Hermann Goering's promise that the Luftwaffe could supply the army by air, forbade a breakout. He ordered Paulus to stand and fight, but the airlift was a failure.
Hands in
The Germans were starving, freezing, and running out of ammunition. By January 1943, the once proud Sixth Army was a ghost of its former self. Gaunt, frostbitten men surrendered in the ruins they had conquered but could not hold. On January 31st, Field Marshal Paulus, promoted by Hitler only the day before in a tacit suggestion to commit suicide, surrendered instead. The Battle of Stalingrad was over. The cost was staggering, nearly 2 million casualties combined. It remains one of the bloodiest battles in the history of human warfare. But its significance went beyond the numbers. The myth of German invincibility was shattered. The Wehrmacht would never fully recover its strength. From this point on, the road led only one way west. Back towards Berlin, the German army had marched to the Volga looking for oil. Instead, they found only snow and ruin.